So now it's my honor to introduce Dr. Martin Inderbitzin. He's a neuroscientist. He was trained in Zurich and in Barcelona. He has a PhD in neuroscience, and he was embarking on a career in neuroscience research when unfortunately he received a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, and this changed his life tremendously, and he adapted to it in a wonderfully creative way, in which he has been making online podcasts and videos. He talked me into one this morning, actually, in my office, on his and others' survival stories, like the trailer that you saw at the beginning of this presentation. So I'm honored to welcome Dr. Inderbitzin to talk about his experience.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a true honor for me to be here tonight and talk to you. So I'm gonna share a little bit my story. We're also gonna address a bit your story and how we can use shared stories to actually find meaning. With meaning, it's an interesting thing. You know, somebody once said, it's funny, every time I find the meaning of life, they change it. So you probably know that, but let me ask you anyhow, did you ever face a life situation that was totally overwhelming? That was so intimidating that you had actually no clue how to respond to it? And you wished for a better way. Maybe you were struggling and you saw other people who seemed to like just go through it so easy. Well, I have some good news because that's the topic of my work, my research, professionally but privately, and I'm looking very much forward in the next 20 minutes to give you some very interesting insights that I hope will also encourage you and inspire you to rethink how you live your own life. So let me start with my story. I grew up in Switzerland, very close to beautiful mountains. I learned to ski very early. Actually, my parents once told me that I could ski even before I could properly walk. So I had the luck to have a loving family, mom and dad, and a big brother. My big brother was always kind of a role model to me. We are very different as characters, but it's interesting, we accept our differences, so we love each other very much. Another person that I love very much is my lovely wife, Katarina. So she's from Sweden, I'm from Switzerland, that's not the same country. And we live in a lovely town of Zurich, where we work and do our things. As a child, I was always very curious. I mean, every child is curious, but I was really, really insisting. I remember one day I wanted to have the attention of my dad, and he said, just one sec, I'm thinking. So I asked him, where is thinking? I didn't know back then that this was the start of a lifelong quest, that I wanted to understand the human psyche. Later on, I studied neuroscience, first at ETH in Zurich and then at UPF in Barcelona. I did my PhD on the topic of stress and emotions. So I wanted to understand how actually emotions affect the way we learn and behave. Back then, I didn't know that I would not only study this topic on a theoretical level. In 2012, out of the blue, I got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Obviously, this was a big shock. I don't have to tell you. I mean, I was fit, I was young, I just did my PhD, I was ready to start my life, and then this. My doctor back then, he said, don't Google it. Well, I did it anyhow. Consulting Dr. Google is a really smart idea if you have a flu. It's not the smartest idea if you have pancreatic cancer. So I don't underestimate if I say I was completely floored when in a random Google search result I read that actually 95% of people with this type of cancer die in 3 years. I was like 32 years old. I could not grasp what that meant. I was completely stressed out. But now comes the interesting thing. I knew everything what was going on in my body. I mean, I had a PhD on the topic of stress and emotion, but I couldn't cope with the situation. So I think knowledge is highly overrated. We always say, like, knowledge is power. Well, that's only partially true, you know. The Stanford Library will not solve the problems of the 21st century by itself. You need somebody who is applying that knowledge. So, if you have Wikipedia in your pocket and you actually can look up everything, it doesn't make you more resilient. But then what does? Well, I had not only a very good doctor, he was also very empathic. So he had actually what you were showing in the introduction this time to say some words with me. Let's put that quickly away. So he said, look, some years ago, we had a very similar patient. And we actually managed to treat this patient successfully. And this patient is now happily skiing in the mountains. So this picture of somebody skiing in the mountains, it became somehow my lighting tower, my mantra. I was saying, wait, I have all these bad statistics against me, but then I have one story. That means, like, okay, maybe I can also be one story, because this story, it was somehow the personification of a possibility. This story inspired me to rethink how I saw my own situation. Shortly after the diagnosis, I had to go through chemo, and as you can imagine, when you're 32 years old and you have pancreatic cancer, they give you the whole arsenal they have. This really sucked. Excuse my language, but sometimes you cannot say it in other words, because sometimes there are no other words, and I think it's also very important and healing if you can just spell it out. It's no way and no point to talk around it. So I remember one day I had to go to the hospital, and then you get connected to all these infusions and you share the room with others. There was another guy, and he had not such a good day. He was pale, he was not looking good, he was pretty annoying, talking to everybody. And at one moment he looked to me and said, you know what I really want? I said, no, I have no idea. So he looked me into the eyes and said, I just want to die in peace. You know, that's not what you want to hear when you are connected by an infusion and fighting for your life. So yes, it was making me angry. I also felt sad for him. But it also triggered something, because he offered me another story, not the story of the skier, a story I didn't like. And so this story actually inspired me to do something that would change my life forever. So while I was still connected to this chemo, I picked up my phone and I signed myself up for a triathlon. Well, I have to add a little detail. I never did a triathlon before. So I knew how to swim, and I played tennis and ping pong, so I thought that's a good start. The next week, I had to be in the hospital for a full week for a combined radio chemotherapy, and I found out they had a gym. So I said, great, I'm going to start my training. So when I walked in with my chemo bag, the guys there, they were looking pretty pale, or they were like, what are you doing here? Of course, after 5 minutes, I was completely done. That had nothing to do with the proper triathlon training. But, you know, for me, still until today, this training session is one of all the trainings I'm most proud of. Because it was my first step. I think too many people are focusing on the finish line. And they say, oh, I can never do that. I say focus on the starting line. And this was my starting line. After I was having my first trainings, I started to swim, or I have to say float, because I was in the pool, and then came these old ladies, and they were taking me over. I was like, okay, I think I still have some potential for improvement. The last discipline in triathlon, you have swimming, running, and biking was biking. So biking was the last, because you need more stability and have to be a bit more fit. And so I started biking. So this picture actually I showed in the beginning is from a bike ride I did together with my brother, where he was taking care that I was not overdoing it. I smile there and I make a victory, but it was hard, it was not easy. And I'm sure I will not standing here today without his support, without the support from my family and my wife. And I think you pointed it out very well in the other talk that social support and also professional support is so important if you want to get through something like cancer. So this really helped me to get more and more into the mood of like, okay, I can do that. It's actually possible. And unbelievable but true, but just 3 months after my last chemo, I actually crossed the finish line of my first triathlon. Thank you. And again, I was not alone. Next to me was one of my best friends flying in from Barcelona, Giorgio, and on the left side from you, my brother, who were both running and biking and swimming in the same race, which was truly very, very touching. Now, running a triathlon, it was amazing. But what was even more amazing is what happened after. Suddenly, I received these messages and emails from other patients saying, hey Martin, I found your story online. It inspired me, it encouraged me, it gave me hope. I can do that too. And this was the moment something clicked, because I had this story of the skier and it inspired me to change something. And now my story became some story for somebody else and they do something with their life. So I said, we have to do something about that. So my wife and I, we quit our jobs and we decided to fundraise some money and travel once around the world and document cancer survivors from different continents, different cultures, different backgrounds, different belief systems, just listening to their stories and what they have to share and to see what we can learn from them. So you have seen in the intro the trailer. I'm not going to show you that. But maybe if you paid attention, I can point out, maybe I've seen there is a skier in the trailer. So that's actually the skier my doctor told me. So he's still alive and doing well skiing in the mountains. So today these stories, they live online, mainly in social media. We have a website, but we try to go where people are. And we try to share it in formats that people can consume when you have a chemo brain, like podcasts to listen to when you're like tired, or short videos, not like half an hour, so that you can process it. And that's one reason why we decided to go for this kind of vector. Now, interesting to point out, why are stories powerful? Because a story provides us something or someone to aspire to. And that can be very uplifting. Important is that it should be something that is not too far away from you. And it's like just in the sweet spot that you still think, oh, this person is a bit ahead of me, but I can do that. And that's very personal. Like everybody in this room will connect with another story and it will induce another action. For me, it was the skier. And I did something pointless as running and biking and swimming for 6 hours in a circle, which probably for some people make no sense, but for me, it did. And so it will be for you. Like you will find your story that you can like use to empower your own journey. Story can be very powerful when you're in a crisis. I know that very well. I have a lot of experiences with crisis because just 1.5 years after I crossed that finish line, my cancer came back. This was actually even harder than the first time because I said, okay, this is the beginning of the end. That was like 4 years ago. But still, it was like, okay, now it just goes down. And I lost completely hope. I couldn't pick up myself. And what was interesting then, it was my wife actually who came to me and helped me to find a way out of the darkness. And no, she didn't tell me what to do. She told me a story. She told me a story of a patient she found online from Sweden, another pancreatic cancer patient where they treated her with an experimental chemo that seemed to be very successful. Despite they could not like remove all the cancer, she seemed fine. So this story was helping me to see my own situation in a new light. Half an hour later, I was on the computer and my wife, like searching stuff, and my wife was coming to me and was like, what are you doing? Are you looking for more stories? I said, no, I said, I just bought for us the 2 best tickets for the opera. We're going to go out tonight. So, this photo I showed you in the beginning, it's from the day where I received my first relapse. We are smiling on this photo, but that doesn't mean that everything was fine. Of course it was not. You know, we have to understand there is always a story behind the story, the backstory. Now, unfortunately, we don't talk about this very often in society, so everybody thinks, the others are doing so well. When I asked you at the beginning if you ever wondered how other people go so easy through challenges, well, the answer is very simple. They don't. They really don't. There is nobody that can go in an easy way through a challenge. Because a challenge, by definition in itself, is tricky. It's not easy. These people, they also have breakdowns. They are just more persistent in getting up again. Or to put it in other words, and I think that's a very interesting concept, people who cope better with challenging situations, they are more comfortable being uncomfortable. And that allows them to sit it out, and then after a while they pick up the pen and they say, okay, now I'm ready to write the next chapter. And this concept is actually has nothing to do with cancer, you know. You can apply it to anything. Maybe you have another illness. Maybe you have a family issue, a divorce, a financial crisis, or you have problems at work. It doesn't matter what challenge you face. What you have to understand is that you will face uncomfortable emotions. And the only way you can deal better with that is you learn how to deal with that uncomfortable situations or emotions that you experience. So, what do we do with that? I could now give you a little lecture about my PhD, and that would be probably interesting, and you would learn some interesting things. Or I can do something else. I can show you a little trick. So, as you know me, I like practical stuff. We're going to do a little trick. So, what we're going to do now is we're going to draw a little comic. I have here a little whiteboard, and you have all a piece of paper. And so what we're going to do is we're not going to draw a comic together. What we're going to do is that I'm going to ask somebody to come up here on stage and draw a comic for us. And because I give a lot of these talks, I realized it's sometimes really hard to find a volunteer, or you always get the same kind of people. I learned that it's much better if I randomly choose now somebody of you, and then I will ask this person to come up here on stage and draw the best comic you can. Don't worry, I will be here with you. I will not help you, but you will be fine. Okay, so let me see. Who maybe has an artistic talent? Sometimes in the back, you know, shy people have sometimes a bit better hidden talents. Let me see. I think I'm gonna take nobody. Okay. What did just happen? What did you experience? Like stress, like please, not me. So, I can give you here a lecture for 3 hours, and it doesn't matter if you have a PhD or if you're a nurse or whatever, you will have this automatic response. This is part of how we are wired. And that will also happen when you get hit by a cancer diagnosis, or if somebody in the audience suddenly has a problem. You cannot manage it. It just triggers, okay? But what you can do is like what I'm going to show you now. So now you can take your piece of paper and your pen, and you're just going to follow what I'm doing, okay? We start with the number 66, which we put in the middle of the piece of paper like this. I'm going to try to show people on this side, just the 66 on this side. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to make 4 stripes. We start on the left side of the 66 like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Then we're going to place the pen on the left side of the 66, and we're going to make half a circle like this. And now we're going to place the pen on the right side. We make another half circle like this. All right? Now we place again the pen on the left side below the half circle. We make a little curve like this. Now we place it on the right side. We make a little curve like this. All right. Now we make half a moon here. If you want, you can also put it in the other direction. And the last thing, we place 2 dots. So now, what do you see? Comic. If I would ask you now to come up here on stage and draw a comic for us, how do you feel? Do you observe a difference to just 2 minutes ago from like, oh no, don't pick me, to actually, yeah, I could do that, it's not so bad. So you just changed the story you tell yourself, but how did you manage to do that? Well, you were watching somebody solving your problem in front of your eyes. You got kind of a role model. You get a concept, like literally you have like a model now on your paper that you maybe can apply. That doesn't mean that you would come here, you would be completely flat in the physiology response. Like we would have to train out the whole evening, like one by one coming up here. And if you would repeat that 100 times, it would be the most normal thing in the world. And so what's the same thing with drawing like a funny comic is with going through heavy situations in life. The only way that you can cope with it is you have to go through it and you have to exercise and like expose yourself and get comfortable being uncomfortable. So tonight's event is called Celebrating Cancer Survivors. What does that mean? Does it mean that you have to run a triathlon in order to be celebrated? Of course not. Does it mean that we only celebrate if things go fine? No, of course not. We all know that life is not that easy. You have seen, I had a very turbulent time in the past years with ups and downs, and it takes some courage to come up here on stage and share my story. But it takes even more courage to come up here and share my backstory. So let me do that. When I fly back, I will schedule my next intervention. It will be number 5. And I'm honest with you, that's scary. That's very scary. You know, because also when you go 5 times through cancer, it still every time gets triggered. But if there is one thing I learned is that I have a choice what I do with that. Do I stay home and listen to a bad story that for sure will not make me feel good? Or will I come up here on stage, like I asked you before, and share my experience in the hope that it will inspire somebody else? Standing here, you already know which story I chose. So I like to say, just to conclude, that change the story you tell and you will be able to change the life you live. So that's a very powerful concept, and I would like to challenge you and also encourage you that every day when you wake up and get out of bed and like things are not looking good, remind yourself that it's actually you who choose which story you tell. And choosing a better story doesn't mean that you're ignoring reality, no. It just means that you dare to give yourself a chance. Thank you so much for listening to my story tonight, and thank you.